There we go.
Oh,
Hello,
Great.
this is Georgia Court. I'm the proprietor at Bookstore Number One, and it's always wonderful to have a poetry reading, whether in person or on Zoom. And I'm so glad you all can join us. Just a piece of business, and that is that if you would like to purchase Peter Filkins' book, there is a link in the chat. If you go to the chat function, it's at the very top. There's a link that will take you directly to Bookstore Number One to purchase the book. So consider that, particularly if you like what you hear. You can link on that. Well, I'm going to introduce our two speakers tonight, our poet and Doug Knowlton, with whom he'll be in conversation, and turn it over to them. Our poet this evening is Peter Filkins. He's a poet, translator, critic, essayist, and biographer. He's the author of 5 collections of poetry, the most recent of which, Water, Music, was published only a few days ago. His previous volume, The View Were Granted, received the Sheila Margaret Moughton Best Book Award from the New England Poetry Club. And his poems, essays, translations, and reviews have appeared in the Paris Review, the Yale Review, the Sewanee Review, Poetry, the American Scholar, and numerous other publications. He teaches writing and literature at Bard College at Simon's Rock and courses in translation at Bard College. He's going to be in conversation with Doug Knowlton. Doug Knowlton is a colleague at Bookstore Number One in Sarasota, and he is our poetry guru. And I'm just so delighted that he is going to lead the conversation this evening. Doug's memory of writing a first poem harks back to 1966.
Wow.
Over the years, influences came and went. Tennyson, Emily, Frost, Stevens, Teasdale, for example. He recalls having to memorize a portion of Thanatopsis in school. Okay, and the school paper printed a first published poem his junior year. But it wasn't until Oscar Chudanowski, bookseller and proprietor of Oscar's Books in his hometown of Huntington, New York, handed Doug a copy of Leaves of Grass, that a deep identification began to emerge. Writing poetry would be how all his crazy feelings and ideas and rushes of meaning might be understood, if only as a conversation with the paper. Now Doug publishes chapbooks for friends and family, and I'm the grateful recipient of his most recent one, which is all about October. So thank you, Doug. It's an actually wonderful chapbook. But I'm going to turn this over to Doug and Peter. Enjoy.
thank you, Georgia. That was wonderful. Brought back memories. It's really been a pleasure just in the last few minutes getting to know Peter better. As I told him, I think I could stand to go 2 or 3 hours just to talk about his translation work and his work with H.G. Adler's biography. And that is something I had to put off because I had to read all his poetry first. And the thing that I love about his poems is their range, from everything from Rocky and the Little League baseball and trees and birds and all the rest. And in his new book, this undercurrent of music that flows through everything. And I think you'll see if you read his book, what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful work. This evening, though, I really want to start out with a question or two that's non-literary to get things rolling, and then move towards Peter's actual reading and his comments, which is what I'm really here for, is to hear what he has to say. But the first thing that comes to mind is how Zoom has made all this possible for us this year. Technology is similar to it as well. But it's really meant a lot, because for those of us who write or have communities around books and the experience of books, and Bookstore One's whole way of being in the community is about bringing people together around literature. So it's meant a lot. My first question to Peter is, what in particular have you missed about the in-person experience?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Georgia, and to Bookstore One for having me read, albeit virtually, but it's a great pleasure to do so. I guess I kind of want to start on the positive side, and that is, I have been to more readings and done more readings in the past year than I, quite often have before. I go to lectures and talks that I just normally would not be able to go to because I would be teaching or at home or having things to do or couldn't travel that much. I mean, the fact that I'm reading in Sarasota, Florida tonight is I wouldn't, the publisher can't afford to send me on the road. I can't afford to do that. I've done a lot of readings this past month. Chicago, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Denver, Boulder, Boston, New York City. And that's just been fantastic to have that chance to do it. And then I've been teaching since last March online. I quite enjoy teaching online. I seem to have a knack for it. I think it's much easier for literature courses. The students read the books, we talk about the books, and that happens online, and it goes pretty well. What have I missed about in-person? I miss meeting people in person and frankly signing books and hearing about their stories or their works or their anecdotes of poetry or life in general. I miss seeing the bookstores. I love bookstores, and particularly independent bookstores. And wherever I travel, I make it a point to try and find new bookstores. So that's what I most miss, is being in the actual physical bookstore.
I certainly resonated with that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that others in the group did too. Is there anything happening at Bard right now and the campus?
Well, we've had a very good year. We've had almost no cases of COVID. They've done a remarkable job at the main campus.
Wow.
It has 2,000 students plus a music conservatory. And there's been just a tiny handful of positive tests. And at Simon's Rock, we have had, believe it or not, we've actually had none on our campus whatsoever. And so we're a very tiny college. We're only 400 students, and we're kind of set off from town, so our campus is cut off from the rest, so we don't allow the public to come onto campus.
Right.
And things have gone very, very well. Enrollment has been good, and we're looking good going into next year. We've had a tremendous number of online events. I hosted a talk on Rilke in my class at the main campus just on Friday. NYU professor came to talk. And every week there's half a dozen talks, online talks going on, lectures, talks, performances. So it's not as bad as one might think. It's with a lot of elbow grease and cooperation, we've
Right.
through it.
It's wonderful to hear that report from out in the world where things are going on. It sounds to me like most of the classes are still online.
At at Simon's Rock, it's about 2/3 in person and 1/3 online. And I would say that's probably the same ratio at the main campus, maybe a little less online. There was a great effort to try to get as many people to teach in person as possible. They set up tents with heaters and things like that out in the
Right.
the courtyards and things like that. So
It's cold up there.
yeah, it is.
Well, thank you for that personal touch in response to my questions, Peter. I think what we're really excited about, though, is hearing your poems and then discussing some more after you've read to us and talked about your work. So I'm going to turn it over to you now and let you lead the way.
Happy to do so. I'll primarily read from Water Music, and you'll see it has a slash between the two words. And you'll also note that the artwork on the cover is a piece by a young artist by the name of Michael Zelahosky, who actually is a graduate of Simon's Rock. I never taught him, but I used a piece of his artwork on my last book, The View Were Granted. We became friends, and I found this piece that just worked very, very well for the title of this book. And then after we had the image and we were in production, I discovered the work of art was up for sale at a local gallery and was able to purchase it. And I just adore it. The title of it is called Thousand Year Stare. He has very poetic titles for his work, and this audience might enjoy knowing that it is composed of detritus from a Florida hurricane. And that's what Michael does. He takes discarded items, things like old pallets, and makes works of art out of them. And the painting part of it was actually a painting that another artist, some anonymous artist, did. And Michael found pieces of it and incorporated that artist's work into his own. He didn't know who the artist was. It was thrown away. He had no way of telling it. So I liked how it fit the work. The reason for the slash between water and music is that I'm trying to tread the line between nature and culture, right? Water and music. And I think that's the place where we live as human beings. And it's kind of what I'm interested in exploring. When you're in the realm of nature, you're in the realm of solace and, dare I say, comfort, or at least peace. When we're in the realm of culture, so often we're in the realm of history and suffering, and what we must endure. And the book kind of makes that journey from history into nature. And I'll like to try and trace that journey with some poems tonight. The first one I will read is the first book in the poem, which is simply called In Vivo, which means to carry out or perform in the body, right? Versus in vitro, but to actually carry out and experience within the body. It's a short poem, In Vivo. Suffering knows what cannot heal the self embedded in the pain of pain, and so continues unrestrained, lancing the mind that won't let go. The bloodied self, alone, sustained by sharper knowledge, suffering knows. And that in some ways sets the theme for the first section of the book, which takes a hard look at the world around us. This is a poem called Nobody's Road, which unfortunately is about the sort of plague of mass shootings and school shootings. It was written particularly for the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012. I live here in Western Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, and down the road from me, there is actually a road called Nobody's Road. And I always thought that would make a wonderful title for a poem if I could ever find the right subject matter. And unfortunately, this was the subject matter that it did seem to fit. Nobody's Road. Nobody knows what troubled the kid. Nobody even knew where he lived. Nobody remembers hearing a thing. Nobody considered inquiring. Nobody thought to call the police. Nobody worried it would come to this. Nobody can say how he got inside. Nobody knows yet how many died. Nobody can think of just what to do. Nobody can help but feel deja vu. Nobody agrees how to prevent it. Nobody wants their rights suspended. Nobody can fathom the depth of such grief. Nobody is sure just what to believe. Nobody can undo What has been done? Nobody is watching the neighbor's son. And then this is a poem. I haven't read this poem yet in the readings I've been doing. It's the last poem in the first section, and simply called "To the Coming Disaster," which of course we all know there's another disaster coming inevitably. To the coming disaster. Somewhere in the heart of Texas, a small town explodes, is thankful, on camera. God was watching, classmates dead or stunned, a live feed streaming captives, unable to verify casualties. We leave you with this story, caught on tape, sequestered, imprisoned, smuggled, released. That's the world of the messy world we live in. The book in the second section moves to a more private world, of a motive world, and one tied again to the natural landscape around us. I'll read a few of these poems and simply just give the titles. There's nothing really to set up about them. Obad is a morning song, and that's the first in that section. Obad. The seagull, kiting in a cage of wind, navigates again its scry of need. Beyond the docks, the wooden boats, rough barbs, buoying flight toward an end to flight, and gravity riding the wind. Little problem. Longing, we say, and by extension imply duration, we cannot stay. Caught as we are somewhere between the all apparent and what we've seen of storms, of harbors, the wind-chopped bay, laced with whitecaps like macrame, slow to unravel and tattered seam, knotted with longing, we cannot stay. Willow. Amid the toss of light that rakes the rust of oak, pearl gray cloud cover bellying rain, the willow lingers, pliant with weeping that is not there, and yet is what we know it by, among hemlock, among ash, beside the lake water that laps the rocky shore as a heron unfolds its pageant slate above the surface, rippling bruise. Credo. Never complain, the jonquils say, blousy with breeze they cannot hold, and the breeze itself, saturated, cold, dispenses torrents, a black cloud drained to quick exhaustion, and the marauded plain of jonquils blazoned. Never complain. And then the last of this section, nocturne. Suffice it to say, the full moon's hard light exposing the ambush of sea invading the harbor cannot know the concerted blast that cripples an elm to a stack of limbs. Suffice it to say, and say it to praise, the burnished horizon, its collar of rust, suppliant above the sea's reckless glitter, these meager stars piercing the scrim of moonlight proffered, its silver, its peace. The third section returns to history, but at a different angle of regard, mainly through art, painting, and through other poets and elegies or homages even to poets who have meant a great deal to me. This is a poem. I was in Ireland 2 years ago on a writing residency and looked at a house that looked over a lake, and looked out from my study that one morning and saw what I took to be actually a JMW painting, Turner painting, JMW Turner painting. There's a great wash of light and energy and pulse, and And what it was a snow squall coming across the valley and the sun shining through it. And it was just very powerful, very moving. And I sat down to write a poem about it. And it is the only time in my life that I've written a poem in real time. That is to say, it took me about an hour to write the poem. Just as I was finishing it, the storm disappeared and was gone. I tweaked the poem a little bit later on, but not much. It was kind of a gift that kind of came out of nowhere. Sun through snow. Turner could have done no better, nor did he. Articulating the light made now radiant, prismatic, hills, lake, trees, and woolen sky filtered by this sun-threaded squall of snow, as real as veneration, the smell of rain, the heft of stone, or the thought that within an hour it will be gone, the veer and waft and thrust of clouds and light, electric with the backlit pulse and shimmer of each ray of snow, consigned to memory and weather, closing down this moment's glow. This is a poem called The Wild Boar. And this actually was something that happened to me. I was fortunate enough to visit East Berlin before the Berlin Wall fell down. Not fell down, came down. And this is back in 1983 or 84. I can't quite remember which. And in those days, to get to Berlin, West Berlin or East Berlin, you had to travel through East Germany on a designated highway, and you were not allowed to get off the highway. And you had to show up on time in Berlin, or otherwise you were going to be questioned by the East German police. And they had a thing in Germany where you could arrange to basically hitchhike with someone, arrange for a ride with someone. It's called Autostop. And you would show up and they would give you a ride to where you wanted to go. And in this case, it was Berlin. And it was two hippies in a out-of-service ambulance driving that I rode with across East Germany in the middle of the night. We were driving, and we hit something, a wild boar in the middle of the night. And so the poem is about that event and driving across East Germany before the wall came down. The wild boar. Was it Kiki or Heinz who offered us that ride at dusk from Hamburg to Berlin those many years ago, the sun setting across the barren expanse of a North Sea march as the car, an out-of-service ambulance, pulled onto the transit highway from which there was no getting off, except to stop, wait for the East German cops to show up, and question the driver and his passengers as to why he'd halted the car and delayed our scheduled arrival in Berlin, surrounded as we were by borderless frozen fields, vacant as the eyes of that policeman, unable or at least unwilling to believe we'd hit something in the dark, which, bang, was there and gone, the driver turning onto the gravel shoulder as we got out to assess the damage done, the headlight shattered and caved in, while at the edge, caught in the twisted chrome and there for the cop to inspect, the bristles of a boar we'd hit which none of us could see or saw as it crossed into our path all those years ago, the wind slicing through us, that transit highway bleak as the thought of tomorrow among the closed-off reaches where that boar still ran, wounded and mortal. Was it Gabi? Was it Fritz? The third section returns to nature, but again with a kind of historical bent, or at least an acknowledgement of our implication within nature, our place in nature, and sometimes not an altogether comfortable or pleasant place within nature. It's a poem called False Cardinal. It was written in Stonington, Connecticut when I was a fellow at the James Merrill House. And that spring we had no snow. That winter we had no snow. I walked all winter long in Stonington, Connecticut, every single day, no snow at all. And then the Cardinal showed up and was there like a red throbbing pulse in the tree outside my apartment, but actually 3 weeks earlier than it should have been there at all. And of course, we know the implications of those kinds of phenomena these days. So, false cardinal. Just before sunset, a cardinal sets its doo-wop chirp-chirp atop an elm, a knot of flame like an epithet inside the evening sky-blue dome. Spring again, the cardinals return, now 3 weeks early. Revenant of a future we've come to learn, will see the planet dead and spent, or not, or maybe so, while likely the cardinal's song, undulant still in its late day last call reveille, will find us at evening, facing west, transfixed and emblazoned, a cardinal sun sinking in each pane of glass. It's a poem called Arrowhead. I live on a lake here in Western Massachusetts. I was saying to Doug when we were chatting beforehand, I've actually lived in this house my entire life. I joke with people that I know the history of blades of grass in my lawn, how much I know this landscape. And as a little boy, on the edge of the lake, we found arrowheads. I found 2 when I was a little kid and have them in my desk. This is a poem about finding an arrowhead, or what an arrowhead means, and trying to imagine my way into a culture which, of course, sadly enough, has entirely disappeared. And in fact, a culture probably much better bound with nature than we are in our own modernity. Arrowhead. Flint point planted in moraine gravel, each beveled chink a milk gray ghost. Mohawk? Mohegan? There is no nation to water's chuffed, sun-voweled surface, or the indolent trout ashine and spotted, as an arrow aims, shoots, pierces, wild hunger gutted in the silver sheen of limp, wet fish, the chalk-dry taste of history in the arrowhead that lies askant my narrow desk. It's called Oracle. Of course, the Greeks, to visit the oracle, went into groves of trees and would listen to the rustling of the leaves and the sounds of birds. That's where they thought that they heard the gods. And I think at our best, that is nature is a place where we still commune with spirits beyond us, and this reflects on that. Oracle. We look to nature for what we long to see, a cloud's dissembled face in the aqua blue, the reed buffeting breeze, the slow shamble of water chuckling the creek bed's gravel. Whatever is hidden at a glance's edge, the mind will have it. A bobcat spotting prey too far outside its burrow's sunken cavern, the spider stalking a fly in the nimbus of a web, the owl's muffled flight, the pewter gleam of a muddy river's eel, the timpani of ice thrumming a lake's black kettle, marginalia in motion within this evening's pregnant calm are palpable, yet invisible, magnified, dark silhouetted hills dilating before you, dusk sharpening their backlit edges, talismans at twilight, the whir of birds. The last poem in the 4th section is simply a poem called Turtle. It came from an experience of being out driving in on a back road in the Berkshires and as you do this time of year, seeing a turtle in the middle of the road who's obviously crossed to lay her eggs on one side of the road and then will return to the swamp afterwards. And came upon one and just decided to write about it. Turtle. Shy panzer of the swamp, atavistic in your haughty calm, you blink at us encapsulated in our swanky Prius, crossing the road from the prehistoric world you're going to or coming from to lay your eggs in the sandy bed of tomorrow, knowing, like the dead, that however slow, indeed it will come, and does, even if absent of you, sanguine, curmudgeonly, immemorial as mud or the memory of mud, propelling you on as you cling to your path through fan-tailed ferns that flood our eyes with green heraldry, fresh and real. So by the end of that fourth section, my hope is that we've come back to nature, come back to a place of foundation, come back to a place of resting. The last section carries an epigraph from the great American poet Theodore Rothko from his notebooks. It says, "If there is not another life, there is at least another way to live." And that's the hope of what I tried to trace in the book. And in the final section, I think that way to live is to make and to write, and to write poems and to make art, and to live as best we can. So I'll read you a few poems that try to capture that spirit. Writings. Swallows at daybreak, pure inviolate sounds, the flit and splutter of their antic rounds across lake glass, dipping their tails mid-flight and lambent, translucent inkwells left pooled and pooling toward the outer shore, a water-pocked trail, their signature. Let's see. Shell. This is a good Florida poem. You have lots of seashells. Right? Shell. Held to the ear, there's nothing to hear but what's not there, as somewhere the roar crashes ashore on the cochlear coast of the conch's weir of atmosphere. Is that we've all done that, put a shell to our ear and hearing the roar of the ocean. And of course, the cochlear is the inner ear itself, that which has its own roar. It's a poem called At Anchor. If you can imagine yourself in a harbor or out on the ocean, and seeing, this took place in Stonington, Connecticut as well, and seeing all of the boats with their names. And I'm always fascinated by the names that's boats. Some are funny, some are serious, some are somber. And I began to sort of reflect upon all of these names. And I think it's really a poem about language and its powers. At Anchor. Alchemy, cirrus, mockingbird, rogue, vesseled monikers within whose hold fortune swells and eddies rest, temporarily contemporaneous. Pot o' gold and down and out, as like as revelation to flout brassy pretense above enigma's dinghy, while solitude heads once more to sea. What's in a name? Juliet might know, but she's not telling. Ivanhoe and Rumba, Magic Jack and Gin, all incarnations of whatever whim set them afloat upon those tides of money, romance, or sporting pride, which land best in a 30-knot knoll and another case of caviar on iron will. 30-knot squall and another case of caviar on iron will. All is happenstance, all illusion. Or is it? Loss, pain, utter confusion? Just where are they? Scuttled, no doubt. Failure, termites, cancer, gout. Banned as well by deference, custom, or those leveling humors that steer us home to one another, stranded as we are in a sea of signs and seeking harbor in the quiet smile that understands divorce, a sly nod at vindication for some, true hearts but rarely true for others, while those on missing you at anchor within that sun-pooling cove must plunder memory to find their love, present unaccounted for, albeit gone, as a buoy bells out its constant song. Meanwhile, with distraction out at sea, Invictus loses again to destiny, as its captain curses that tub cantata for cutting him off in the annual regatta, thus costing his name, etched in pewter, polished to hold the somber luster of the harbor at twilight. That's my Hun, sunk in the shadow of the cutter Python. A little bit of fun. Let's see. I will end. This is, yeah, I will end with three more poems. A soft day, which is an Irish English phrase for it to be a soft day is a day of very light rain. And it's a phrase I love. A soft day. Oh, it's a lovely soft day. You'll hear the Irish say, and I tried to write a poem to try and describe that. This just tries to do that. A soft day, lovely the soft day when hours stretch like months, as out a window one's gaze hurdles entanglements of love or work or health, and we recall what we see is a cloud whose subtle stealth belies a threnody, more mist than drizzle, a wet, muffled murmur, moist as a kettle's whistle, hard rain, a distant rumor, yet here and still composed of salving dew on fresh-cut grass, saturate gray air that floats above, a subdued susurration, a damp excess. And a poem called Making Hay, which is simply about that, of what it means for hay to be made. And I love the smell of hay, particularly in the middle of summer. Making hay. Dotting a fresh mown pasture, they are abstracted, lozenges of green, whose yield will feed a winter's hunger with a summer's field. For now, they sit there, circumspect and salient, as totems to another time, whose sickles and scythes seeded the baler's tines, this sun-baked stubbled plain of Timothy and fescue, configured with each pass, summer materialized in cylinders of grass. Yet, absent the sharp inflections of blade on polished hone, is there really any loss, or is it dim nostalgia denying is for was? For it's haying that remains, patient, mindful husbandry, never quite out of style, so long as the scent of clover still carries a country mile, to circulate among us, lost to screens and pixels, the freshet of this summer day, sweet with its own idiom, the musk green smell of hay. And then the last poem I'm going to read is a poem actually from my first book called What She Knew, which was published in 1998 with a lovely painting by my friend Peter Bagley, who also grew up in the Berkshires, lives now in Paris as an artist. And the reason I'm reading this poem is that it is dedicated to my longest and closest friend, a man named Peter Carpenter, who has just passed away just this past weekend. He died at age 84. He was like a father to me. I went to work for him in the summer of 1980 in South Wales to rebuild some terraced garden walls on the estate, the property that he owns there. And there's a moment when you're building stone walls where, of course, it stops being a collection of stones and is all of a sudden a wall. And it's quite a magical moment where the particulars become the whole. And this is the poem is about that. It's also a sestina, so you will hear a lot of repeating words, which are trying to be set in just the right place. The wall. In the morning, the wall we'd built from various stones stood somehow changed by sunlight in the garden, the morning dew, and the air cool from the valley and clear. For what was clear was that our wall, as if out of thin air, had become more than its stones, more than just a shape in the garden to organize the weeds. It had changed because how we saw it had changed, standing there in the patch we'd cleared. What had simply been a neglected garden now contained our wall, larger, more wobbly than any stone. Way off in the valley, the air lay open as air, grassy, wild, unchanged. There the fields were scattered with stones. But was our field a field more clear because divided, set off by our wall? Or was it simply our garden? Answers grow poorly in gardens. It has something to do with the air. Yet for all its bulk, the idea of our wall had brought us a delicate change. The flowers less wild, more clear in their reds and green on the stone. Somehow something strange, not of stone, had crept out in the midst of our garden. How sad, how clear it felt there in the early air. Everything around us was changed. For what had been our wall was clearly now a part of the garden, destined to change in the air from garden to wall to stone. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you, Peter. I'd like to invite everyone to unmute and also give Peter a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Doug.
We did this one day, and I think everyone was snapping their fingers like the old days. You know, I'm struck by the continuity of your life. You've let us in personally to your home here on the screen, but you've also told us about the history and your connection to it. And even though you've traveled widely and loved that, the warthog poem, or was it warthog? Yeah.
Wild Boar. Wild Boar.
Yeah. Wild Boar. Yeah. Yeah. And of course the wall in Wales. But you have this long history that has, I imagine, has had an impact on your writing, and I feel a kind of a classic sensibility even in the arrangement of the poems, and how each section of this new book has 10, sometimes I think in the fourth section 12, and then the final 11 poems. There's a very closeness in terms of how it's arranged, the alternating poems without punctuation, and they're just free, and then the more static ones. It's quite a impression, because I hadn't really thought about how life could inform one's work like that. And I'm leading up to a question that's a little bit related, and that is, when did you know?
Yeah, no, very early. When I was 16, when I was 16, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I took a creative writing class in high school, and I thought I wanted to write fiction, but the first segment was on poetry. And once I started writing poems, I was hooked on just language and trying to shape poems and trying to describe the world around me. And so it was very, very early. I mean, and I never looked back. I knew it right away. So and I knew I would teach too. That's a natural thing for writers, but I also knew that teaching would be important to me, and it has been.
Well, I can't help but believe that the certainty around that and the early had to do with your mentors, but it also had to do with the sense of living in that place and being a part of that vegetation, you might say, even
Yeah.
the wildlife.
I mean, my family has lived on the same street for 250 years, and we are not blue bloods. We're working class, managerial.
Sure,
I was the first.
sure.
I was the first of my family to ever go to college and get a degree. So I had a very strong sense of stability of who I was and where I came from, what I was an if you will, a native of. And I think it's very hard to feel native to much of anything these days,
Right.
given the way the world goes. And then I've been attracted to those same kinds of places: South Wales, the countryside, Ireland. I lived in Vienna for 2 years, and that's a very deep European history. And those are, I feel, this sounds like a very pretentious thing to say, I sometimes feel more like a European poet than an American poet. And I don't mean that in any hoity-toity kind of way, but that sense of deep history, and history wedded to landscape. I live 20 minutes north of where Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick.
Right.
I drive by it every single day. Emily Dickinson is an hour east. Frost is.
I've rambled in those hills.
Yeah, so I mean, it's teeming with writers and.
Sure, my dad took me to Amherst when I was 16.
Yeah. So yeah, that gave me a strong sense of stability. You can hear it. Obviously, there's a formal music going on in the poems, but that is not a campaign on my part. It's how I hear poems. It's how I write poems. Right. It's how I feel them inside my body. And I expect it's from reading writers like Seamus Heaney. The Making Hay poem is actually an elegy for Richard Wilbur, who lived half an hour away.
Oh, sure.
We were friends. We were very good friends. So you have to be honest with who you are and what was given you, and you have to work with that. You can't try to make it up. So the irony being, I end up feeling a little more on the margins because I don't think this is kind of the heart of where American poetry is right now.
Well, I'm so glad we've had the opportunity to get to know you and hear your poems, and I particularly like the boat poem myself. The what was it, At Anchor?
At Anchor, yes.
Yeah, and I cheated a little bit. I opened my book up. I had read it before, but I wanted to see it again because you have to have those clues of the italicized boat names.
Right. I try to pause so that they come across as the names.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I want to open it up to the rest of the group here and see if we have any other comments or questions or reflections.
Please, anything. I'm not precious about any of this.
Well, Peter, I have to ask you a question. This is Georgia. I'm sorry. I see that my name is not showing. It looks like my name is admin, and it isn't. But in any case, I have a question for you about the Wild Boar poem. And it has nothing to do with poetry. I happen to have a friend named Kiki Miner, who was hitchhiking through East Germany roughly around that time. I wonder if it was Kiki in the van.
And I made up the names. I really can't remember the names. Was it Kiki or Heinz? And that's kind of almost what got the poem going, because I realized I couldn't remember the names.
How interesting, because she talks quite a bit about. She writes memoirs and she talks a bit about that. So it's not our Kiki. Okay.
No. It's also true that we did not see the boar. We hit it, and we really literally got out of the car, and the only way we could tell
the fur
was the bristles in the headlight. Yeah. So
good. At least you had evidence.
There you go. Well, for the cops when they showed up.
Right.
Other questions, really?
I would like, can I say something?
Please, Donna.
Okay. I I'm speechless. Okay. It was fabulous. I loved all of them. Okay. And like Doug, the boat poem, I'm gonna have to buy the book just so I can look at those names of the boats, like, wow, and anyway, it was fun. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It was a fun poem to write. I think the most fun moment was, thinking about, well, why don't we name boats, failure or termites? I mean, wouldn't that be a hoot if you saw a boat which said failure or gout? Right? And so I like, I'm not afraid to have a bit of fun in a poem too. I think
I
that's
also like that section. Was it 3 that began with Obad and ended with Nocturne?
yeah.
Yeah. And that was more of the intentionality or something there that was a part of the structure that really grabbed me.
Yeah, and I tried to move away from narrative or subject there, just seemed almost a kind of emotionally atmospheric poem, just sort of drifting through space. I think that section has 10 poems in it. It's kind of like one big poem, and it works that way. And I think we were talking earlier. I write on many different kinds of things, and actually books are very hard for me to put together because I have so many disparate things: art and history and animals, and uh, and so that I really do think very carefully about the arrangement of the book. I even think so much so what poem is going to be on a right-hand page and what poem is going to be on a left-hand page.
Yeah.
And I absolutely worry that for months and months at a time, trying to figure out what the best order is. So you're perceptive to see that there's a lot of care. Was that someone else or?
The other poem that I really enjoyed was The Turner and the Lights.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yes.
The snow. It was beautiful. And it's like I could see the Turner painting right there. It's just fabulous. Yeah.
I had not written, because I was writing this biography of H.G. Adler for several years. I had been writing poems, but I had not had a steady stint of really throwing myself into poems. And the biography was done, and I was at this residency in Ireland and wrote the poem. And this is certainly unusual for me, but also probably a bit unusual to say. As soon as I finished the poem, I actually wept. And it was because to have that feeling again of looking at the world and being able to make something out of it, and that it's the thing that I never that I am always grateful for, and to have been away from it and to have it that intense, like I say, to write the poem in real time was rather intense and rather a powerful moment for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that Turner one, I tell you, I had to go back and reread that one. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Doug.
And nice to have the background now about the process.
Right.
Anyone else? Oh, we still have a couple of minutes here.
That's good. I'll just end with one more poem from the book, the last poem in the book, which is a nice send-off poem, I think.
Terrific.
It's simply called Envoy. It's dedicated to my poet friend Abbott Cutler, because we both have spent a lot of time driving to teach. And I drive, when pre-pandemic, I drive 500 to 600 miles a week to do my teaching, to get to the main campus and to get to my Simon campus. So which doesn't bother me. I'm used to it's beautiful countryside to drive through, but I've sort of tried to make a poem out of driving all that time. It's called Envoy. A burl of light on a pane glass window, cold drizzle, wet snow, eruptive weather. And this our only legacy, to know the low-hung cloud that glances off a mirrored surface yet more real than the cloud itself. Muddy April, indecisive to the last, mimicking the slap of wipers back and forth across the slope of windshield, or oddly at the corner of Main and North, that storefront window reflecting now the curve of heaven, the noxious exhaust, pedestrians astride the polished glass, the cars rolling by, the dog on its leash. And with that.
Wonderful.
Thank you all. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Peter.
Peter.
Thank you,
We'll
Doug.
be in touch.
Right.
Great,
Thank
please.
you for coming.
Yep. Thanks all. Good night.
Good
Good night,
night.
all.